Hello.
Hello, hello. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
So you weren't just clapping for fun?
For you, to greet you.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Sir Richard Branson, you've been supporting Ukraine for many years, and this is your third time here. How did you feel coming here now, in this situation?
So honoured to be in Ukraine, honoured to meet so many incredibly brave people. I think Ukraine has, I mean, the world has, if we had a hat, it would be, doffing our hat to Ukrainians, because it's incredible, I think, what Ukraine has achieved against terrible odds. But there's work to do, and I think all of us around the civilized world need to do what we can to help. Although the Ukrainian people have fought incredibly bravely, obviously, just sheer Russian might has meant that you have lost territory, and we have to get the Western countries to do even more than they're currently doing. Obviously, everything that they've done so far has been a bit late. Trying to say that one day Ukraine can join the European Union, that Ukraine can join NATO.
One day.
It's a bit late. So as an entrepreneur, we look at problems and we try to see how problems can be solved. And I spent 55 years building businesses and trying to solve problems. And I think the message I've got from my trip so far in Ukraine is to go back to the West and say, there's no point in drip feeding weapons to Ukraine over the next 3 years. Ukraine needs the same amount of weapons that Russia has in Ukraine within 3 months, and it's got to be, urgent.
Can they provide us with so many weapons?
I think there are countries that can, and those countries need to be talked to. We will talk to them and try to persuade them that it's important that this happens quickly. We also need to look at the sanctions against Russia and see if there's a better way. At the moment, what has happened is that the sanctions have resulted in the doubling of oil prices, and therefore Russia is financially really not that much worse off, if not better off, as a result of the current sanctions policy. Is there a better policy? And we've got some proposals which we're discussing, which maybe will tighten the grip on Russia over the current proposals. So I think by coming to Ukraine, by having a really good lunch with your foreign minister, by meeting President Zelensky, I think we'll be able to go away with a much clearer picture of what needs to be done. And then we will help as much as we can, and we'll try to get other people to help as much as they can. And I think that Ukrainian people deserve it. You're fighting the war for the rest of the civilized world. Unlike the rest of the civilized world, your people are dying for it. And the least the civilized world can do is make sure you have the proper equipment to do the proper job.
I wish all the civilized world understand this, because it seems to be that not all of them.
I think that the civilized world is more united than it's ever been because of the war in Ukraine. But I think you're right. I mean, if you're in Poland, I've just come from Poland talking to business leaders and NGOs there, they completely understand it. They are on the border. They feel the pain, and obviously they fear the pain as well. If you go further away, the further you go away from the war, I suspect people feel the pain much less, which is all the more important that people who've got some kind of influence in the world and maybe recognition, contact people in positions of power and try to persuade them that we've got to move quickly. We've got to help Ukraine. The only way this war will be resolved is if Ukraine is starting to push the Russians back, and then one day one might be able to get a peace agreement. But until that happens, if Putin feels he's got the upper hand, I can't see this being resolved. So we need to be sure that Ukrainian people have the power to push Putin's forces back.
Yeah, we need weapons for that.
Yes, and some countries are being good,
and we appreciate
that. But they can be maybe even better. Obviously, I think America and Britain have done well, but every country who can, I think, can help more.
Who do you think can help us better, but not doing it yet from the European countries?
And I don't think it actually helps to point fingers too much publicly. There are some European countries, and they know who they are, who have promised things and they don't seem to have delivered yet. But there are also countries in the Far East who've got weapons, who are friends and allies, and they could do better, or they could even start helping. So there's quite a long list of countries that can help, that are not necessarily helping properly at the moment.
You've been an active participant in rallies against the Vietnam War, then invasion of Iraq, and once you said that you always opposed unjust wars. Are there just wars?
One could argue that the Second World War was justified in fighting against, say, Britain fighting against Nazi Germany. I think that war was justified. I think pretty well every war that has taken place in my lifetime has been unjustified. Yeah, as you say, the Vietnamese War, I marched against that as a young man, started a magazine to campaign against it. The Iraq War was, the second Iraq War was definitely a very bad mistake. And I'm afraid Russia cites that war in its propaganda. The Libyan war was wrong. But there is a difference, and that is that the invasion of Ukraine is an attempt to wrest sovereignty from a nation. At least those other wars were not trying to wrest sovereignty from those nations. And so with the Ukraine war, it is completely and utterly against everything that United Nations stood for, when it was formed in the 40s. The Russians obviously signed, I think, the Budapest Agreement in 1991, persuading Ukraine to give up nuclear weapons in return for the sovereignty of this country.
And what do we see now?
People, in the West forget that agreement that was made, and and Russia seemed to have, obviously they just ripped up that agreement and have now behaved atrociously. Well, not Russia, Putin has behaved atrociously, both back in 2016 and now.
Do you think the whole fault is just lies on Putin?
I think this is Putin's war, and I know many Russian business leaders who are appalled by this war. I'm not talking about the oligarchs. I think the oligarchs are appalled by this war for different reasons, but just ordinary Russian business people who built businesses or entrepreneurs in Russia, and they vehemently are against this war. They're vehemently against Putin. Some have been brave enough, like Oleg Tinkov, who built a a bank called Tinkoff Bank from scratch to speak out, and of course he's had his bank effectively taken away from him. Others I can talk to, and they're just vehemently against the war. So I do think that people who are reasonably well read, who traveled the world in Russia, who know what's going on in the world, blame Putin completely for this war. And I think Putin is fighting this war. He knows that if he doesn't stay in power for the rest of his life, he's likely to just be in prison for the rest of his life, or worse. I mean, he has no compunctions in poisoning his enemies or his adversaries. So, he will, I'm afraid, wage a war to distract his country, to try to stay in power. And I'm afraid it's as cynical as that.
Why those business leaders you talked about, they don't do anything to influence the situation? I mean, of course, if you try to do something as one, you won't be able to do anything. But what if together and do something? Why they're not doing that?
I've spoken to them about doing a joint letter or something as a group. To be honest, I don't think they're brave enough to do it, and the consequences for them would be considerable. Now, there will come a time, obviously we all hope sooner than later, that I think there will be a coup against Putin, and let's, all I can say is I just hope it's soon. But when you have the amount of feelings running in Russia against him by intelligent, civilized people, you do feel that at some stage there could be a coup. But there may not be a coup. We've got to assume there isn't a coup, and we just got to help Ukraine fight in the meantime.
On January 27, 2022, you made an appeal, before the beginning of an all-out war, you made an appeal to business leaders all over the world, asking to come together and to stand up for Ukraine's sovereignty. Did you have the feeling that the war is inevitable? That it's going to happen for sure?
I was worried that it would happen for the reasons I gave. I thought that Putin could conduct the war just to, as a way of distracting his people from his dictatorship, and people are apt to rally around a leader in wartime. So I was worried. I spoke with President Zelensky at the time. At the time, I think people were not convinced that Putin was going to do an all-out attack onto Kyiv, and there's no question that Putin surprised I think the world with his attack on Kyiv. I think people felt that he was trying to make sure that he was going to secure the east. But at least Ukraine gave him a bloody nose and pushed him back, there's a new line being drawn, and we just got to help Ukraine make sure that line does not forever push into the rest of Ukraine.
Business during the war in Ukraine is suffering. What do business should do to survive the war and to help our country?
Well, look, I think Ukraine has a very entrepreneurial group of people. Obviously, a lot of those people are having to fight in the war itself. I think the number one priority is to start to push the Russians back by getting the arms that are needed. The second priority is to make sure that sanctions on Russia work. At the moment, they're not necessarily working. They're pushing the price of oil up, and therefore, Putin's has even more money to fight with. So there may need to be a rethink about that, and we've come up with some suggestions which we're discussing to see whether maybe there should be a slight a change of approach there. As far as those people who are not, fighting in the war and are able to run their businesses, there are a lot of I think there are a lot of overseas businesses that could tap into Ukrainian businesses and work with Ukrainians, and I think that that's something that I was talking to the Polish business leaders. They want to help more with Ukrainian business leaders, and I think we need to help more, and everybody needs to help more as well.
Your business initiative, B Team, is it still operating? It's still...
Yeah, I mean, we have an organization called the Elders, which Nelson Mandela started. The Elders look into conflict resolutions, and they try to see how they can help resolve conflicts, and we will be making it clear to President Zelensky that I'm bringing a letter from Mary Robinson, who's chair of the Elders, to say that at some stage they would be happy to help try to sort out. I mean, in the end, every conflict ends with a negotiated settlement, and they could help there.
After the annexation of Crimea, your business initiative, B Team, you were trying to organize a meeting with Putin to somehow help the situation. How did it end that time?
It obviously didn't happen. I think the time for a negotiation is when both sides feel that they could lose the war, and I'm not sure that Putin has reached that position yet. But I think it's important that there is an organization that is talking to both sides, so that once that situation has been reached, that a conclusion to a conflict happens.
Have you been to Soviet Union?
I've been to Russia, but not for about 3 or 4 years.
Why I'm asking, many analysts believe that the roots of imperial habits of Russian society lie in the nostalgia for the USSR. Do you see similarities between then and modern Russia?
When people have nostalgia for the past, it's often very mistaken. I do remember the Soviet Union, and I remember waiting 36 hours to get a phone call through back to England. It was pretty ghastly. Now Russia is a little bit better, but having nostalgia for the Soviet Union would be a big mistake for anyone to have any nostalgia for the Soviet Union. It was a pretty dreadful regime.
The Russians' war in Ukraine caused a huge material damage to Ukraine. For now, it's approximately around $100 billion. Where to get this money from?
There's going to need to be a Marshall Plan for Ukraine when the war's over, or even whilst the war is still taking place, and the world community is going to need to help Ukraine. One idea that we're exploring is some kind of slight change to the regime in the oil embargo and gas embargo on Russia, and that would be to potentially allow some supplies, but put a big Ukrainian tax on any money bought from Russia that goes to the rebuilding of Ukraine. Anyway, it was an idea that actually an ex-Russian dissident talked to me about, and it's just something we're exploring. But anyway, there's going to need to be global support for the rebuilding of Ukraine, in the same way that there was a Marshall Plan for Europe at the end of the Second World War.
I just wonder how to make him pay and if it's really possible to do it against their will, because to do something like Marshall Plan, they have to admit that they lost the war and they did a lot of bad things in Ukraine. And I don't think that he's going to admit that.
He will not admit it until he's defeated. But I think there are ways that, whilst this war is still continuing, that money can be extracted from Russia and put back into Ukraine. It's something we're going to explore, and we'll see whether we're successful at that.
Are you going to invest in Ukraine once we win this war? Because you can become a great example for others, you know.
So, I am a business leader, but I'm not getting involved in Ukraine because I want to invest in Ukraine. I want to be involved in Ukraine completely independent of anything to do with business. I just want to be involved in Ukraine to try to help fight an unjust war and try to help bring that war to an end, and encourage other people to come and invest in Ukraine. There can be a slight sort of conflict if if you're trying to do something good and at the same time you're thinking of investing. I just don't want there to be any conflicts. I just like to be very clear-cut. We're here to help the Ukrainian people win a war and get back on their feet and become, keep their independence and be part of Europe and welcome Ukraine into Europe and as a peaceful country going forward for hundreds of years. Other people will, younger than me as well, who will invest in Ukraine in the years to come. I would rather just concentrate on helping Ukraine fight this war and not worry about the business aspect at the moment and leave that to other business leaders to do.
It seems that you're a person who fulfilled all your dreams. I mean, last year you flew into space. What did you feel looking down from there to Earth? What was your first thoughts?
I looked back at this beautiful Earth and thought that in my lifetime, in most areas, the world has got better and better and better. In the amount of people coming out of poverty, the amount of wars that have, wars seem to be a thing of the past. The amount of people suffering from food malnutrition. Apart from the environmental issues, pretty well every other issue seemed to have been better. And then the Ukrainian war starts, and you've got all the suffering that is happening in Ukraine itself. You've got the knock-on effect in Africa, where I've just been, on malnutrition and people not being able to get fed. I've just been met a woman who has had to hide with a disabled child in a bunker when the Russians were ransacking a house above. I mean, looking down from space, one could not imagine that the world would go backwards in the way it has, which is why we just got to make sure we win this war, and the world wins this war, and Ukrainians win this war. And so we can look, the next time we go to space, we can look back at this world and think that hopefully the Ukrainian war is the last major war that takes place on this beautiful Earth.
I also hope so. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you very much.
You for being with us in such a difficult moment for our country. Thank you very much.
Very good.
Thank you.
Best to you all. Thank you.